Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest iteration of the National Prison Debate League. This is our spring finale debate, and it is a doozy. My name is Daniel Troop, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Prison Debate League, and it is my honor to present today's event in conjunction with the Maine Department of Corrections and our partners at Wake Forest University. So we have an amazing debate between individuals from Maine State and Bolduc State Prisons in Maine versus the Triple Crown National Champions of Debate in 2023 from Wake Forest University. So it is an honor and a privilege to be able to bring these two amazing groups of people together for this special event on a very important social policy and legal policy topic. Now, what you're going to hear today is a complex policy issue. So we just want to let everyone know that you may hear things expressed that aren't necessarily reflective of everyone's personal views in terms of legal terminology. But at the end of the day, you're going to hear some advanced arguments on a very complex issue. I'd like to really thank our partners from Maine Department of Corrections, especially Deputy Commissioner Anthony Cantillo, Tricia Flanders, Anna Black, and Philip Pitoco, along with our debaters who really are just so impressive in what they represent, and not just in their own humanity, but in their skill level, which you're about to see displayed. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging our teams. From Maine State Prison, Mr. Leo Hilton. Leo has a Master's of Science in Conflict Analysis and Resolution with a concentration in social justice advocacy and activism from George Mason University, and Leo hails from Augusta, Maine. Matthew Cushing, pursuing a bachelor's degree in mental health and human services with a concentration in grief, trauma, and loss. Matthew is from Old Orchard Beach, Maine. Stephen Clark, PhD student and certified recovery coach. Stephen is from Southern Maine. Chris Law Liberty is a contemporary and public music performance major through the University of Maine at Augusta, and Chris hails from Richmond, Maine. Sean Libby is a bachelor's degree in the science of mental health and human services from the University of Maine at Augusta, currently pursuing his master's degree in youth development through Michigan State. Sean is originally from Standish, Maine, and has been incarcerated for 24 years. Abel Tashome is a critical thinker and the team alternate, and he's from Portland, Maine. From Wake Forest, we have Mr. Nico Battle, an international affairs and German major from Seattle, Washington. Nate Kruger, a junior and psychology major from Brooklyn, New York. Sebastian Chow, a philosophy major from Houston, Texas. Marge Strong, pursuing her master's in communication from Chicago, Illinois. Paul Wolf, sociology major with a minor in communication and statistics from Edmond, Oklahoma. And the head coach of Wake Forest, Mr. Justin Green. He's a professor of practice and communication and lifelong debate educator from Houston, Texas. We also have some amazing volunteer coaches from the National Prison Debate League. We have Professor John Katsoulis of Boston College's Fulton Debating Society. And we have Mr. Tom Jewell, formerly of the University of New Mexico. These two individuals coached the Maine State Prison team over these past number of weeks as a part of our training program with Maine DOC. And most of our participants, other than Sean, don't have any debate experience. So we decided it'd be a great idea to throw them up against the national champs. What could go wrong, right? But what you're going to see here is really the power of prison education personified, because at the National Prison Debate League, we are all about setting the stage for human talent to be seen and heard as we attempt to not just break stereotypes and build bridges, but we hope to open hearts, minds, and doors through the thoughtful discussion of these important topics that need to be had. Because when we're able to do so in a way that focuses on the actual subject matter, we're able to understand where each other are coming from, even if we have different viewpoints. And it's just going to be really cool to hear what these two teams have come up with today. To moderate this event, we have a personal friend of mine. He's the NPDL's Director of Community Outreach. He was also with me in the beginning when we started these prison debate teams and programs in Massachusetts. And this issue is near and dear to his heart, as he is an individual who not only has experience with the system, but he is an individual who overturned a wrongful conviction of a life without parole sentence after 20 years in Massachusetts. So there's no one better qualified to moderate today's event than my friend and very gifted speaker and debater himself. Please give a warm welcome to your moderator today, Mr. Clarence Williams.
Good afternoon. Today, we will be having an awesome debate. I am honored that I was actually asked to moderate this debate because, like Troop says, I kind of have a little bit of experience in this. So for the sake of time, I'm going to jump right in and let's get started. Good afternoon, friends, supporters, and honored guests. You are all about to witness an unforgettable display of both intellectual ability and social diplomacy in action as our teams from Maine State Prison and Wake Forest University debate the following topic. Today's resolve is the United States should abolish life without parole sentences. Maine will argue in the affirmative, supporting this resolution, while Wake Forest argues in the negative position, refuting the affirmative's case. Each debater will be judged upon the following criteria: analysis, reasoning, evidence, organization, refutation, and delivery. The five very distinguished judges today's debate are Ed Lee III, Chief Judge, Director of the Berkeley Forum at Emory University; Andrea Roth, University of California, Berkeley Law Professor with a JD from Yale Law School; Jessica Clark, Executive Director of Connecticut's Sentencing Commission; Alex Sarkov, Executive Director of Connecticut's Sentencing Commission. Jessica Clark, Executive Director of Denver Urban Debate League. Sorry about that. Priscilla Guerrero, Assistant Attorney General for the District of Columbia. As today's moderator, I will introduce our debaters individually, and they will all adhere to their specific time limits. A digital timer will be displayed on screen, and speakers' microphones will be muted if they exceed their time limits. At the conclusion of their debate, our judges will tally up each team's cumulative point totals to determine the winner of today's contest. So with that being said, we'll now start. With all of that said, it's now time to open our minds and start this debate. Presenting the affirmative team's first constructive argument for 7 to 9 minutes, Maine's Leo Hilton.
All right, can you hear me now? In which case, before I begin, I'd just like to let you know that each one of us has extensive debate experience, since living in prison is a constant debate. So, life without parole is a death sentence, death by incarceration. For the purpose of this debate, life without parole shall be defined as those sentences where a person is scheduled to die in prison. We will also expand this definition to include virtual or de facto life sentences, which refer to those that total a maximum of 50 years or longer, ones that are so long that the incarcerated person is unlikely to survive their sentence. I am serving one such sentence. Having been incarcerated at the age of 18, I will have lived my entire life over twice before having a chance at release. I will have served 2 full life sentences, assuming I live that long. Life without parole sentences, or LWOP sentences, cause 3 types of incredible harm that call for their immediate abolishment. 1, they are fundamentally bad for U.S. society. 2, they are inhumane and cruel. And 3, they do not work. Our first point is that life without parole sentences are fundamentally bad for U.S. society. Extreme punishment for punishment's sake is now a hallmark of our criminal legal system. There are now a staggering amount of people serving life sentences. According to Rebecca Tan and Ovetta Wiggins of Washington Post, about 203,000 prisoners are now serving life sentences, more than the size of the entire prison population in 1970. Each of these 203,000 prisoners is part of a family. The collateral damage spreads far and wide. Children, spouses, parents, and loved ones face lifelong stress and financial strain as they work to maintain relationships that will never be the same. People serving life without parole sentences miss their children's weddings and their parents' funerals, and children grow up knowing they will never see their parents outside of prison visiting rooms. Confining people to long sentences permanently destroys lives. Lynn Adelman, U.S. District Court Judge in Milwaukee, observed in 2020 that, open quote, released prisoners suffer a 30 to 40% loss of income, their domestic partnerships are often ruptured, and their marriage prospects reduced. They suffer a profound social exclusion, making it more likely that they will fall into recidivism and re-enter prison, close quote. Beyond the devastation of individual families and communities, the economic burden placed on local, state, and federal economies is staggering. According to criminology professors Kleinstuber and Goldsmith, it costs $30,000 for every incarcerated person held in prison, and that amount doubles to $60,000 for anyone over the age of 50. If these funds were diverted to education, job training, and poverty reduction programs, the professors argue society would achieve more effective crime prevention. Another societal harm to life without parole is that it promotes racism. People of color are overrepresented among those serving life in nearly every state. According to Ashley Nellis, senior research analyst at the Sentencing Project, in 2016, nearly half of all people sentenced to life, both with and without parole, were African American, and 2/3 were people of color. Even more strikingly, 82.2% of those serving life without parole for a nonviolent offense are non-white, and 65.4% of them are Black. U.S. District Court Judge Lynn Adelman rightly observes that long prison sentences are producing a massive underclass, disproportionately made up of racial minorities. Clearly, this represents a serious problem for American democracy. The second harm to life without parole sentences is that they are inhumane and cruel. Even though these death sentences are nearly universally applied throughout the U.S., life without parole sentences are virtually unheard of in the rest of the world. In 2013, the European Court of Human Rights declared life without parole to be a violation of fundamental human rights. In their ruling, the European Court recognized that hope is an important and constitutive aspect of the human person. Even those who commit the most abhorrent and egregious of acts nevertheless retain their fundamental humanity and carry within themselves the capacity to change. The European Court held that to deny anybody, open quote, the experience of hope would be to deny a fundamental aspect of their humanity, and to do that would be degrading, close quote. I have been incarcerated now for almost 15 years. I've been a hospice volunteer providing palliative and end-of-life care to dying men for 8 years. Compassionate care, loving care. Yes, I committed a violent crime, but I am not a violent person. On the contrary, having experienced the depths of trauma, depression, and suicidal ideation, I have the ability to sit with people in their pain and suffering and care for them in their time of need. Why deprive me and the 200,000 others like me of the opportunity to redeem ourselves? Why kill me when all I want to do is help others heal? A third argument against life without parole sentences is that they don't deter crime. 7 states have achieved reductions of more than 20% of their prison populations since their peak. And these declines have come about without adverse effects on public safety. According to Mark Maurer, the former executive director of the Sentencing Project, a 2014 analysis of the prison population reductions in California, New Jersey, and New York found that the 23 to 26% decline in those states' prison populations was accompanied by a continuing decline in crime that outpaced national declines in most categories. In fact, a 2020 study conducted by professors Kleinstuber and Goldsmith examined whether states that use life without parole more often experience less violent crime or greater reductions in violent crime. The authors concluded that the empirical evidence shows, open quote, life without parole does not seem to produce any additional crime reduction beyond that which is produced by parole eligible life sentences, close quote. Moreover, the authors believed that certainty of punishment is more important than its severity, and that the deterrent effect of longer sentences maxes out after about 20 years. Catherine Beckett, professor of sociology at the University of Washington, observes that countries with far lower recidivism rates than the United States also experience far less crime, and many have enjoyed declines in crime rates that are similar to those that have taken place in the United States without increasing their use of incarceration. Our solution is to abolish all life without parole sentences, all life sentences, including virtual, de facto, and life without parole sentences, and to implement a safety review board to retroactively review all sentences at 20 years. To be clear, we are calling for universal eligibility for review, not universal guarantee of release. The safety review board will be comprised of professionals from varied disciplines and will review each person's case according to criteria developed by experts. Abolishing life sentences and initiating a safety review board will, 1, address harms being done to U.S. society, 2, ameliorate cruelty in the current system, and 3, actually work to increase community safety and prevent harm. To address harms being done to U.S. society, this solution will serve to reconnect families, support reentry and reintegration, and reduce the exorbitant cost of burying someone alive. Our solution of abolishing life sentences and implementing a safety review board can serve to ease the cruelty of the current system by actually recognizing rehabilitative and transformative engagement by incarcerated people. Providing an avenue of relief to those sentenced to die in prison will inspire hope and will serve to reunite parents and children, siblings, spouses, and estranged loved ones. By creating an avenue that supports people in their reentry, we can support and implement restorative practices that cultivate the building of community, which is the only meaningful deterrent to interpersonal harm. When we learn to heal together, grow together, and care for each other, it makes it really hard to turn around and violate each other. That is a system we need: avenues of meaningful accountability, repair, and healing, not punishment, separation, and death. Finally, our solution will work to increase community safety and prevent harm in ways that the current criminal legal system never has and never will. The current system does not have the capacity to cultivate community. By acknowledging what criminologists have continually asserted, that people age out of crime, we have the opportunity to free up the exorbitant amounts of money currently used for incarceration and redirect those funds to social interventions that research shows produces greater public safety benefits. Imagine what could happen if we would take the obscene amount of money being poured into incarcerating people and redistribute it into our communities, restorative justice, victim support services, substance use disorder programs, prenatal services, and into the education and care of our youth. Let's do that. You don't hold people accountable by locking them up with no process in place to correct and rehabilitate them. You hold them accountable by giving them an opportunity to grow, learn, and make amends for their past. Our current system of locking people up without any possibility of release is not only inhumane, financially burdensome, and directly opposed to what the majority of victims prefer. It is a system that offers no incentive for rehabilitation by either the individual or the departments of corrections. It is a harmful system that absolutely must end. Thank you.
Providing cross-examination for the negative teams for 1 to 3 minutes, Wakes Cole Wolf.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good afternoon.
I have a couple questions. The first, abolition in all instances?
Yes.
The second, you mentioned that safety review boards might be employed. You said that there were certain criteria that those boards would use to see if the funds were going to assess the public good. Would you mind expounding upon that?
Yes. A common practice that is evidentiary is an evidence-based actuarial risk assessment, which will accurately determine a person's likelihood of reoffense after release. That would be the primary determinant, in addition to the person's record during their incarceration of programs engaged in rehabilitative and transformative efforts, as well as their past criminal history, to know what their history was like and to know what safety measures must be put into place in order to provide for public safety in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. You also mentioned that we've seen this to great effect internationally, i.e., how life without parole has been abolished in European countries. Have we also seen similar systems of review boards, and how has it worked there? Or is there data?
So what we are positing the creation of a safety review board takes the model implemented in Norway that has been successful, that is primarily comprised of lay people, and actually raises the stakes, implements the practice of independent parole boards, where it is actually professionals who do this work, professionals in their fields of mental health, psychology, the law, sociology, sexual violence, clinical sexual violence treatment, and others.
Of course, you said that the deterrent effect of long sentences ends off at around 20 years. Would you propose that be around the longest sentences that we ought give in America?
I'm saying that the longest time that anyone should serve without review is 20 years. And that is being generous, because the American Bar Association says that that review should come after 10 years.
Understood. Thank you. I have one final question for our last minute. What qualifies as a virtual life sentence, and why wouldn't things like parole solve that?
50 years or longer qualifies. And I know that you want to engage in, the technical aspects of things. And I know that fear-mongering politicians talk about public safety and want to bring up mass murderers and serial killers. And what people don't want to talk about is the greatest and most prolific mass murderer of today, which is the criminal legal system, that is filled with judges and prosecutors who murder people at will, where you have 203,000 people currently sentenced to die, currently murdered by judges and prosecutors who deem their lives unworthy. So please tell me, what is the just desert of someone or a group of people who willfully murders 203,000 people? Answer me that.
That's all the time we have for Cross. Thank you.
Presenting the negative team. Presenting the negatives team's first constructive argument for 7 to 9 minutes, Wake's Nico Battle.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. Good afternoon to our opponents, esteemed judges, and members of the audience. First and foremost, we would like to thank the organizers of this debate as well as our opponents. We appreciate their engagement and look forward to a productive dialogue here today. Along these lines, I would be remiss not to note that many on our side agree in part or in totality with the stated objective of this debate, and thus our negation should not be seen as a reflection of personal values, but rather an exercise in productive civil dialogue. At the outset of this debate, we'd like to note some places where we agree with our opponents. Fundamentally, both sides recognize that the current sentencing and incarceration practices should not continue. The question of this debate is whether or not it is better to abolish life without parole or reform life without parole. Today, our side will defend that a reform is a better option, as it avoids backlash from the public and politicians that could result in an increased use of the death penalty, and that there are some repeat offenders of violent crimes that should remain in prison. Before we get into the problems of a complete abolition, we advocate for the following reforms to life without parole. First, it should not be given to anyone under the age of 18. Despite the Supreme Court ruling that this practice is unacceptable, it has continued in some states. Prolonged solitary confinement should not happen for those on life without parole unless requested by the person in confinement for safety reasons. There have been some states that have utilized this practice, and we believe it is unacceptable. A large part of feeling human is the ability to socialize and have even limited freedom of movement, and there is no reason that this should not be extended. Our prisons should move more towards a Nordic model, and this is our third point. This is one where individuals are housed in a facility where they can cook and clean together, care for each other, without having to do so behind bars, and instead looks more like home confinement. A report from the United States Sentencing Commission notes that of 25,400 inmates released from federal prisons in 2005, almost half, that is 49.3%, had been rearrested within 8 years. Denmark, which houses most prisoners in open custody in bungalows, has a recidivism rate of 27%. This suggests the US prison system does a poor job of rehabilitating incarcerated persons. Life without parole should only be handed out in situations of repeat offenders and violent crimes, first-degree murders and serial sex offenders. But most of those who commit murder and sex offenders are unlikely to be repeat offenders. However, once a person has committed a crime a second time, they are also likely to commit it a third and fourth time. This is why it is necessary to maintain life without parole for repeat offenders, but not those who commit the crime only once. Mandatory sentencing for life without parole should cease, including eliminating the 3 strikes rule and life without parole for nonviolent offenses. There are approximately 4,000 people presently serving life without parole for drug and other nonviolent offenses. This includes instances of property theft, which is also unacceptable. We should provide, or number 6, we should provide those given life without parole sentences the opportunity to have defenses as strong as those in death penalty cases. Professor Robert Johnson explains in 2008, once we accept death by incarceration as our ultimate legal sanction, we should provide to all defendants facing this sanction the same legal safeguards and appellate procedures presently afforded to capital defendants. We will note 2 major objections to completely eliminating life without parole. 1, repeat offenders, and 2, the resurrection of the death penalty. First, repeat violent offenders. While we don't believe that there are any throwaway people, there are some people that have repeatedly committed crimes that they should receive life without parole. As a warning, we will be talking about violence of a sexual nature and leaving out the names of the individuals who committed these crimes. A Texas man in 2022, for example, engaged in multiple sexual violence offenses against numerous minors. Another in 2023 in Missouri was found guilty of 16 rapes involving 8 girls. We could continue on this list, but by now we understand that our audience likely gets the picture. Contrary to the popular belief, most people who are incarcerated for a single instance of sexual violence or murder are highly unlikely to repeat as offenders. Most statistics have it at 1 to 2% at a high rate. However, once they have committed the same violent crime, the chance of committing it a third time increases dramatically. Second, and this is where we will focus the majority of our attention, is the rise of the death penalty. Life without parole is the alternative to implementation of the death penalty. The Death Penalty Information Center is an organization who opposes the death penalty, notes in 2023 on their website. Life without parole is a sentencing alternative in all 27 states that practice the death penalty. In addition to the federal government and US military, of the 23 states that do not practice the death penalty, Alaska is the only state that does not permit life without parole as a possible sentence. Among the 11 states that have abolished the death penalty since 2007, all utilize life sentences without parole. This is a result of public fears. Even if our opponents are correct that it is rare for someone over 50 to exit prison and recommit a crime, it is important to consider how politicians will react. In fact, our harsh laws we have in place now are a result of perception of not cracking down hard enough on violent repeat offenders. Even the liberal-leaning sentencing project, which our opponents cited in their opening constructive, notes in a 2022 report, the unyielding expansion of life imprisonment in recent decades transpired because of changes in law, policy, and practice that lengthened sentences and limited people. The downward trend in violence in America that continues today was already underway when the country adopted its most punitive policies, including the rapid expansion of life sentences. The increase in life imprisonment and the growing extremity of our criminal legal system was largely driven by policies enacted in response to public fears about crime, often rooted in sensationalized media stories rather than the actual prevalence of violent crime in most communities. The report continues. Politicians have become increasingly responsive to public fears about crimes, distorted by media portrayals rather than reflective of the true prevalence of crime. We know that some say those on life without parole are a safety risk, to fellow incarcerated persons. We would like to dispel this myth. The majority of individuals who are on life without parole are less likely to be violent during incarceration than their fellow parole-eligible incarcerated persons. This is not a safety concern for the prison. This is known as a result of a longitudinal study over an 11-year period in Missouri. Robert Johnson, a professor at American University, and Sandra McGonigal-Smith from Utah Valley University note in 2008, for our purposes, the populations under study included inmates serving sentences of life without parole for first-degree murder and inmates serving parole-eligible sentences. Lifers were significantly less likely than parole-eligible inmates to be involved in violent misconduct. Prisoners eligible for parole were much more dangerous than life without parole prisoners. Parole-eligible prisoners were almost twice as likely to commit acts of violence as were life without parole prisoners, and almost 4 times as likely to commit major assaults. Life without parole prisoners would only be pardoned if they were found to be innocent. Johnson and McGonigal-Smith continue in their piece to talk about the relationship between life without parole and the death penalty. Life without parole is increasingly popular with the public, more popular in recent years than the death penalty. Support for the death penalty drops dramatically when the sanction of life without parole is an option. The popularity of life without parole appears to reflect the belief that this sanction may be a better deterrent than the death penalty. Life without parole is a penalty that spares the risk of executing an innocent person. That's important for several reasons. One, it allows the Innocence Project to work to assist in freeing falsely incarcerated people. The benefit of life without parole is that it gives the falsely incarcerated people a chance to prove their innocence and gain release. 2 is the possibility of commutation. While rare, there are a few instances of commutation between 1980 and 2017 for those on life without parole. 3, the death penalty sends a signal of acceptability of the very state-sanctioned murder mentioned by my opponent. This is the fact the opposite of the deterrent signal intended and merely condones murder on a grand scale. Thank you.
Providing cross-examination for the affirmative team for 1 to 3 minutes, Maine's Sean Libby.
Thank you. I have a couple questions for you, Nico. You talked about, and first off, we want to thank you for pretty much agreeing with a lot of our plan. Your plan has a lot of parts to it, but one of the things that we have here, like in 2016, the Sentencing Project identified that 12,736 prisoners are serving life without parole sentences for non-homicide cases. You even cited the number of people serving life without parole sentences for nonviolent crimes. What you didn't state, at least clearly, is whether or not your plan would affect the people currently serving these sentences. Does your plan run retroactively, or would these people, these thousands upon thousands of people serving life without parole sentences for nonviolent and non-homicide crimes still be incarcerated under your plan?
Our argument is, I think, with regard to the philosophical justifications for life without parole, not necessarily a question of what happens to the 203,000 people today that are incarcerated on life without parole sentences, but rather does life without parole as a punitive measure have with it the possibility of commutation, the possibility of release for individuals, the possibility of, or does it recognize the humanity of individuals better than the alternative? Our argument is that it does, because the alternative is a death penalty, which is a cruel and unusual form of punishment that we should reject in every instance.
I'm glad you say that, because Kleinstuber et al. Conducted a comprehensive statistical analysis and found that as LWOP sentences, life without parole sentences, have drastically increased, the number of death sentences and the number of executions in this country have also gone down. So it seems like the deterrent isn't there. As we've seen life without parole sentences increase, we've seen the death penalty used less. So how do you answer for that?
I think that is our argument, is that as we use life without parole more, we use the death penalty less, and that this is a good thing. This is a reason as to why we cannot yet abolish life without parole in every instance, even if the goal of abolition is a good thing to strive for.
You said that it would increase the usage of the death penalty.
No, our evidence and my intention certainly is to argue that the use of life without parole is key to reducing the amount of times that we use the death penalty. And so I'm not sure where
So
the
you,
miscommunication came from.
okay, you talk about the recidivism rates, and
So
what I would on, we have data that shows from the Justice Research and Development Study that 45% of annual incarceration is due to mostly technical violations of parole and probation, not new crimes. So you keep talking about the repeat offenders. Are you talking about actual crimes? Or are you talking about merely technical violations that send them back to prison?
our argument is that we should limit life without parole to those who commit the actual crimes, not necessarily technical violations of their parole.
That's time, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Presenting the negatives team's first rebuttal for 4 to 6 minutes, Wake's Nate Kruger.
Hi, sorry, just took a second to set up. Can everybody hear me all right? Everybody good? All right, awesome. So with all of that being said, I will begin. Hello, I'm Nate Kruger from Wake Forest University. First, I want to take a second to thank everybody for being here, for giving us this opportunity to debate. In my speech, my goal is to go through the affirmative's arguments, try to explain our points of disagreement with them, and to further what Nico said, and to address a couple of key issues in this debate as time permits. The first thing that I want to address is that life without parole is technically and legally different than virtual life sentences. Life without parole is directly defined in legal rulings by justices and administrators. Allowing virtual life sentences to be part of this debate, while it's absolutely worthwhile and educational, is simply not an accurate representation of the topic, since parole is technically available. To be clear, we don't approve of the use of virtual life sentences whatsoever. We just think that this is a different question that should be handled in a different forum. To begin addressing our opponent's points, we absolutely agree with the issues inherent to punishment for punishment's sake, and we agree that the current system is not producing effective outcomes for anybody involved. However, we think an important point of disagreement is that in the affirmatives world, the people who are making these decisions remain in place. The people who are carrying out these sentences, the people who are carrying out punishment for punishment's sake, none of them will go away, which is why it is so crucial to enact these points of reform in the presence of the death penalty, because without doing so, without maintaining life without parole, these people who still are seeking to punish for the mere sake of punishment in the first place still exist, and they are still able to carry out their goals. We absolutely agree that the criminal justice system in its current form is racially biased and that it carries out racially biased outcomes. However, the death penalty is actively worse for these in many ways. When we look at cases of the death penalty, we can see that rates of sentencing are significantly higher when you have a white victim involved, and are significantly higher when you have a Black defendant involved. And these are absolutely issues that would get worse under the elimination of life without parole, as it provides an effective countermeasure towards the death penalty, as our opponents admitted in cross-examination when they questioned why it was that when the rates of life without parole sentencing go up, rates of death penalty sentencing go down. We agree that life without parole as a sentence is absolutely incredibly harsh and an incredibly upsetting thing to experience. The fact of the matter is that the death penalty is actively worse. I want to expand a little bit on one thing our opponents mentioned, which is that hope is constitutive to the human condition. The very fact that hope is constitutive to the human condition means it can be found in various avenues and in various places. The very existence of this debate format in the first place, the very existence of this conversation, and the very existence of things like the ability to act as a hospice volunteer, to provide people the compassionate care they need because you understand what they're experiencing in a way unique to you. All of these are reasons why it's so necessary to preserve the lives of incarcerated people and so necessary to prioritize their protection over putting people at risk. I myself, for instance, have significant experiences from my life onwards, which have been really difficult for me and definitely traumatic. And seeing people as a psychology major here today with degrees in fields that I want to go into, that thing itself allows people who are incarcerated to be role models for people who are on the outside. That itself provides me with somebody to look to guide my future. And I think that the very existence of that possibility in the first place is something that is so key to preserve. Now, our opponent's next arguments have to do with the ability of life without parole sentences to work in terms of deterrent factors. We agree that life without parole is imperfect. However, when you look at the statistics, which we have brought up in our previous speeches, citing the Nordic model, it is better when we are able to let life without parole function in a way that can be reformed. It is necessary to preserve these cases of sentencing when you have certain instances in which recidivism becomes more likely. The reformation and the plan that we would enact would allow us to prevent the technical violations that our opponents mentioned from snowballing into the massive sentences that exist under the status quo, while still preserving the ability to prevent these cases from entering recidivism and to prevent potential harms to society. In essence, we're able to do both. There is a fundamental issue with our justice system today, and there are many ways in which it exists. There are many people who bear its burdens. We should not put them more at risk. Instead, we should try to enact pragmatic reform, because the people who are driving punishment and the people and the public and the politicians who want these in the first place, they exist in either world. They are not going away. The fact of the matter is that they are always going to want to punish in some form, and life without parole as an alternative is net better for those in these cases, which is why we stand proudly in negation. Thank you for your time.
Presenting the affirmative team's first rebuttal for 4 to 6 minutes, Maine's Matthew Cushing.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start by addressing a couple of points that the Wake Forest team made. According to Wake, death penalty usage perpetuates violence. And what I would like to bring up is that life without the possibility of parole sentencing has the same perpetuating effect of violence as the death penalty. The state is still killing people, only slower and more painful. I'd also like to bring up the point that Mr. Kruger raised the issue that virtual life sentences should not be included in this debate due to the fact that these type of sentences would be eligible for parole. I would like to raise the point that states such as Maine do not have a parole system. The MSP team unequivocally rejects Wake Forest's counterargument that life without the possibility of parole sentencing should only be used for the severest of all crimes and hence abolished on a piecemeal basis. If a policy is immoral and inhumane, it is inhumane and immoral for all, not a select few. The ability to change, the undeniable truth of the potential for universal human goodness and redemption extends to us all, no matter what our transgression and histories. Our plan for universal review, not universal release at 20 years, highlights this basic tenet of human decency and the capacity to change, as well as calling for the end to an unjust, inhumane, immoral system where justice is equated with punishment. There is no reason not to include everyone under our plan to abolish life without parole sentencing, because under our plan, individuals assessed by the Safety Review Board who have not reformed, socially rehabilitated, and demonstrated both their remorse for their past actions as well as their desire to change will not be released. However, everyone, no matter what their crimes, will be given an opportunity to demonstrate their capacity to change. Our plan is all-inclusive in its recognition for every human being's capacity to change. In her 2007 paper entitled The Pros and Cons of Life Without Parole, Catherine Appleton, PhD research officer for the Center for Criminological Research, concludes life without the possibility of parole faces many, if not all, objections of the death penalty and therefore is equally untenable in civilized society. To lock up a prisoner and remove all hope of release compromises principles of human dignity and ignores the capacity for redemption and rehabilitation. Furthermore, in a 2020 study by Kleinstube and Goldsmith for the American Study of Criminology to analyze whether states that use life without parole more often experience lower crime rates or greater reductions in crime rate, the first to empirically assess the crime-reducing potential of life sentences without the possibility of parole, found that these sentences might produce a small absolute reduction in violent crime, but is no more effective than life with parole. Wake Forest has tried to discredit our plan by putting forth the argument that only first-degree murderers and repeat sex offenders should receive life without parole, as well as abolition of life without parole will lead to the rise of the use of the death penalty. I would like to address Wake Forest's concern that the abolition of life sentences without the possibility of parole will lead to an increase in the use of the death penalty. Research shows that this concern is ungrounded. I'd like to quote Mugambe Jewell, associate professor at Gould's USC School of Law, who wrote in 2022, empirical research suggests that promoting life without parole as an alternative to the death penalty had limited impact in the decline of capital punishment in modern America. Instead, tens of thousands of people who had never been sentenced to death now get the other death penalty. According to a 2018 essay by the Brennan Center for Justice, the 1984 Sentencing Reform Act made a monumental decision. It took power out of the judge's hands to sentence guilty persons based on merits of their individual case. Instead, new sentencing called mandatory minimums were imposed. As the name states, these were minimum sentences that were not up to interpretation. The number of people serving life without the possibility of parole has more than quadrupled since 1984, according to a survey from 17 by the Sentencing Project. The use of life without parole didn't increase because we stopped using the death penalty. It increased because of the 1984 Sentencing Reform Act made it mandatory for judges to sentence offenders to a new form of the death penalty. In response to Wake Forest's concern that releasing those convicted of first-degree murder puts the community at risk, with all due respect to the Wake Forest team, the research has been done collecting recidivism rates for those convicted of violent crimes released on parole. According to a 2021 study by the Sentencing Project entitled A New Lease on Life, only 1% of people released from prison after serving time for a violent crime were subsequently arrested for murder, and only 28% were rearrested for any violent offense. For every article arguing the inherent danger of violent offenders committing new violent crimes while on parole, there is contradicting evidence, such as Courtney R. Semish, PhD, Senior Research Associate Office of the Research Data, U.S. Sentencing Commission, who found in 2022 survey, only 2.8% of the 13,883 violent offenders released from federal prisons between 2010 and 2018 were subsequently arrested for murder. Whenever there have been studies done like these, they are overwhelmingly show that the vast majority of individuals being released after committing homicide carry little risk of committing a second violent crime. Life sentences without the possibility of parole are the antithesis of the Maine Department of Corrections mission statement of empowering change and restoring lives. They are in direct contradiction to the Department of Corrections' aim to rehabilitate the men and women incarcerated in its prison system. These sentences are morally abhorrent, deeply divisive, financially burdensome, and utterly inhumane. Far from a small-scale peace plan, what we are calling here for today is a paradigm-shifting end to a system that equates punishment with justice, that warehouses people offering no incentive for social rehabilitation and growth, and fails to grant the victims in the community any true sense of closure. We are calling for an end to the inhumane, immoral system of life without parole. Thank you.
We have now reached the halfway point of the debate. Leading us in the opening, the second round, by presenting the negative team's second constructive argument for 6 to 8 minutes, Wake's Sebastian Cho.
Reforming life parole is preferable to complete abolition to contain public backlash and repeat offenders. The policy we propose is as follows. First, states should adhere to the Supreme Court ruling that people under 18 cannot receive life without parole. Second, involuntary solitary confinement is unacceptable unless explicitly for personal safety. Third, prisons should reform their housing structure, activities available, as well as enabling common chores like cleaning and cooking to be in a house-like setting rather than behind bars, taking after the Nordic system. 4, the life without parole should be limited to repeat offenses of first-degree murder and sex offenders. 5, mandatory sentencing should be removed for non-violent offenses. 6, life without parole should have opportunity for strengthened legal defense comparable to death penalty cases. While we strongly agree with our opponent's identification of flaws within the prison system and the necessity for reform, we believe that our reformations are preferable to complete abolition of life without parole. This is preferable for 2 reasons. First, our policy heavily reduces overuse of life without parole while addressing repeat offenders. Unfortunately, there are some people who repeatedly commit sexual violent crimes. This does not deny that our prison system is far more likely to prosecute a Black person than a white person. However, our position is that once someone has committed violent sexual crimes against multiple victims, it is extremely likely that they will commit them again. While we use recidivism statistics to prove this argument, those alone do not paint the full picture. The Leadership Council in 2005 cited an amicus brief from Hansen, Morton, and Harris, written on behalf of the American Psychological Association in 2003. They stated, follow-up studies typically find sexual recidivism rates from 10 to 15% after 5 years, 20% after 10 years, and 30% to 40% after 20 years. These numbers are conservative because not all offenses are detected. Determining true recidivism rates are next to impossible as recidivism rates only count the number of sex offenders released into the community who are caught and convicted. The National Women's Study surveyed a representative sample of over 4,000 adult women in the United States. 8.5% of those women were victims of at least one rape prior to the age of 18. However, only 11.9% of these rape reported to the authorities. Even smaller number result in convictions. Premke et al. Examined recidivism rates on 115 child molesters and concluded that child molesters remain at risk to reoffend long after their discharge, in some cases 15 to 20 years after discharge, and that there is a marked underestimation for recidivism rates. There are a lot of sexual offenses out there, and that people who commit them don't get caught very often. Second, it energizes political movements for a push towards the death penalty. They say that life without parole increases despite the death penalty. However, their evidence is not reverse causal and doesn't fully capture our argument that removing and abolishing life without parole encourages public pressure to use the death penalty more, as well as doesn't take into account the psychological dimension of public fear. First, there's a theoretical understanding of the psychology of abolition that is important. Our ultimate goal is prison abolition. However, how we get there is profoundly important. Evie Geerling notes in 2016, the global demise of the death penalty has been well documented. Life without parole is now an increasingly prominent feature of American criminal justice. That one becomes the conduit of another is not contested in the US. Life without parole becomes an exit from death row as a policy trade-off. In the manner of abolition as important as abolition itself, life without parole as a sanction in its own right had developed as a solution to the problem of a habitual offender. Next, this resolution is for the abolition of life without parole across the United States. While Maine sits at the forefront of the country in many ways, its early abandonment of the death penalty and its lower percentage of life without parole than many other states, in Western United States, the option of life without parole was and is essential to forestalling calls for death penalty beyond just Missouri. The harshness of life without parole provides reassurances for reluctant converts, such as the Governor Richardson of New Mexico. His support for abolishing the death penalty was reported as marking the abolition of the death penalty as a victory for keeping New Mexico safer. He stated, faced with the reality that our system for imposing the death penalty can never be perfect, my conscience compels me to replace the death penalty with a solution that keeps society safe. The state of California and the states of recent proposals replace the death penalty with life without parole, encapsulate the political appeal of the harshness of the smart on crime reform in the Save California Act. Preventing capitalization on public fears of the favor of the death penalty is important for 4 reasons outlined in our previous speech. First, life without parole offers greater time frame and legal flexibility to exonerate falsely accused than if they were to receive a death sentence from groups such as the Innocence Project. Second, commutation for those with life without parole would be threatened by transition to death penalty sentencing. Third, death penalty exacerbates a culture of violence via state-sanctioned sanctioning, which encourages rather than deters crime. Even if life without parole is also state-sanctioned violence, the deliberate, immediate, and explicit nature of death penalty encourages violence significantly more. This is also a time-sensitive issue. The death penalty census indicates that death penalty is decreasing every year, which means that the affirmative abolition of life without parole will be a unique impetus that reverses progress and results in more incarceration overall. Now I'll address their arguments. The first argument our opponents have made is that life without parole results in the destruction of lives. Our proposed policy, however, drastically inhibits and deals with those reforms via implementation of things like the policies that would follow the Nordic system, as well as also abolishing life without parole for a majority of the people that the affirmative is talking about, such as non-repeat violent offenders, those that are under 18, and also offers the ability for commutation and exoneration. The second argument that they make is about racial bias. We wholeheartedly agree with the undeniable biases of the justice system in sentencing that they have identified. However, our analysis is on the shift of sentencing legislation, which means that those same racial biases would be carried out via the death sentence instead, which exacerbates racial injustice performed by the prison system. Abolishing life without parole also increases public support for campaign platforms of over-policing. Those racial biases exist in every process of the justice system, including the process of granting parole, which means that while we agree it is bad, it would be overly optimistic to claim that the AF policy would somehow eliminate those biases in any meaningful capacity. We agree also that about how deterrence via punishment fails to deter crime, and our policy recognizes that by lessening restrictions and offering parole to the majority of both violent and non-violent offenses. However, repeated offenders are likely to continue in offenses in which incarceration is necessary. The third argument that they make is in regards to rehabilitation. However, the process of rehabilitation, or lack thereof, is an issue decoupled and irrelevant to the issue of life without parole. The same public fears will be weaponized towards over-policing, worsening conditions from overcrowding and underfunded prisons, and as executions, which would worsen opportunities for proper rehabilitation. Importantly, only our policy takes effective steps towards actually promoting rehabilitation. The second reform that we propose about the Nordic model would create communities of care by offering humanity and opportunities for growth. This would improve rehabilitation by decreasing recidivism while also decreasing the state-sanctioned cruelty that is prison life. Additionally, the life without parole would also have more opportunities for strengthened legal defenses, which means that the actual possibility to leave as opposed to the alternative death of the death penalty would be much reduced, very reduced. Thank you.
Presenting the affirmative team's second constructive argument for 6 to 8 minutes, Stephen Clark.
In the second constructive, I'll demonstrate that life without parole is immoral and an ineffective method of punishment. First, life without parole constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. The Eighth Amendment to the United States Constitution protects against cruel and unusual punishment. Life without parole is immoral for denying the possibility of redemption. Jacob Brothenhauser, a Harvard law lecturer, wrote in the 2020 Cardozo Law Review, long-term incarceration treats an offender as non-human, as a creature whose life-building capacity either does not exist or does not matter, and therefore is an impermissibly degrading form of punishment. Even those who have committed the most abhorrent crimes retain their fundamental humanity in carrying with themselves the capacity for change. They deserve the opportunity to atone for their wrongs and become rehabilitated. To deny them that hope is to deny a fundamental aspect of their humanity, and for the state to do that is immoral and degrading. By denying somebody the possibility of parole, their sentences will never be revisited or adjusted regardless of any changes in their circumstances. This means that those facing life without parole will never have the opportunity to be released, even if they have been rehabilitated or are elderly and in need of medical care. According to Seller and Blankenship, since 1990, the prison population over the age of 55 has increased by 550%. to 144,500 inmates. In part because of this aging population, the state and federal prison systems now spend some $4 billion annually on healthcare. Additionally, life without parole is unjust because it neglects to take into account the circumstances of the crime and any mitigating factors. This form of sentencing is applied indiscriminately, regardless of the seriousness of the offense. According to the Sentencing Project, 23.9% of persons given life without parole were sentenced for crimes not involving murder, and many were sentenced for drug and property crimes. While we have a criminal justice system where people can appeal their sentences, the fact is, while some of these cases get overturned after years of litigation, it's rare. According to the Supreme Court.gov, the United States Supreme Court receives approximately 7,000 to 8,000 petitions for writ of certiorari each year, but hears oral argument in fewer than 80 cases. And it usually takes several months for the court to issue a ruling. Of the cases that are fully argued and decided on the merits, the Supreme Court overturns or reverses the lower court's decision in roughly 40% of those cases. Think about it. 8,000 petitions, 32 cases are overturned. That's not justice. According to the United States Sentencing Commission, life sentences are considered to be sentences of more than 20 years in duration. I was sentenced to a term of 43 years, which the United States Supreme Court or Sentencing Commission equates to 2 life sentences for a fight that occurred in my home under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Since being in the prison, I've worked diligently at rehabilitating myself. I've worked in many different roles, such as a tutor, hospice, a facilitator, and a peer support person. I've used my time to earn an associate's degree, 2 bachelor's degrees. I'm certified in mental health and substance abuse through the university. I've recently earned a master's degree, and this summer I start a PhD program to research technology and coaching, ways that we can enhance spirituality and human connection. Despite my victim's mom asking the court to overturn my case and hear new evidence that was never presented at trial that her son was violent, that was never done. I'm in a system where my victim's mom thinks that I deserve another chance, along with so many other people whom I've worked with, but the court has repeatedly denied that chance to be heard. In the face of the work that I've done, there's no opportunity for me to receive parole because I live in a state that abolished it in 1976. If my victim's mom is willing to forgive me and see my humanity, isn't it possible for other people? Civil rights lawyer Brian Stevenson said it best. We're all better than the worst thing we've ever done. We're all redeemable. Second, life without parole creates a unique health harms compared to determinate sentences. According to a 2022 ACLU sentencing report, imprisonment with no release date causes feelings of hopelessness that lead to depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. There is also overwhelming evidence that longer sentences decrease life expectancy. Third, life without parole in wrongful convictions is almost never overturned. Katie Rose Quant, a criminal justice journalist, writing in American Magazine 2018, argued that there's a high likelihood that 2,000 people currently serving life without parole are innocent. However, she notes that because they lack the state-funded legal support and unlimited appeals offered to those on death row, innocent people serving life without parole will not be exonerated. According to a report by the National Registry of Exonerations in the United States, only 0.6% of LWOP sentences are overturned. Fourth, abolishing life without parole will promote a paradigm shift away from mass incarceration and towards support for rehabilitation and restorative justice programs. This transformation will occur for several reasons. First, abolishing life without parole and capping prison sentencing at 20 years will lead to better reallocation of resources. Jermaine Lopez, senior correspondent at Vox.com, argued in 2019 that if the US capped all prison sentences at 20 years, it would be forced to recognize a new reality. Just about everybody in prison will at one point be free. And those people will often need programs to ensure that they can transition back to a normal life. Instead of spending billions of dollars on housing elderly inmates who pose no risk to society, this funding will be allocated for rehabilitation programs and support for reentry services. Second, abolishing life without parole will improve the success of rehabilitation programs. Peter Irons, political science professor at the University of San Diego, observed in 2020 that restoring parole eligibility to all prisoners would encourage inmates to keep their disciplinary records clean and participate in educational vocational programs to improve their chances of successful reentry. Third, abolishing life without parole will lead to a greater acceptance of humane prison policies. Ashley Nellis, senior research analysis at the Sentencing Project, argued in 2021 that life without parole is virtually unheard of anywhere else in the world. Finally, abolishing life without parole will not harm public safety. In fact, research has found rehabilitation and reintegration programs, such as those offered in countries like Norway, are more effective in reducing recidivism than long-term sentences. Jermaine Lopez cites empirical studies that show Norway, which caps prison sentences at 21 years, has lower violent crime and recidivism than the US. In conclusion, life without the possibility of parole should be abolished. It's cruel, costly, unfairly applied, and ineffective in protecting public safety. Luke 4:17 through 21, Jesus' mission statement in his public ministry in Galilee included the release and liberation of all those incarcerated. As Jesus said, that an eye for, or excuse me, as Gandhi said, that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. It's time for us to open our eyes and give those of us who have rehabilitated and changed our lives a second chance. Thank you.
Presenting the affirmative team's second rebuttal for 3 to 5 minutes, Chris Law Liberty.
Liberty.
Good afternoon. Today we've heard some interesting topics of debate, and while I think mostly our team and the Wake Forest team is in agreement on a lot of things, there are a few differences that I'd like to talk about. The first one is that Wake Forest keeps bringing up the fact that they believe there will be an increase in the death penalty if we abolish life without parole. The thing is, in a 2020 piece from Northwestern Journal of Law and Social Policy entitled "Replacing Death with Life," Michael Mao concluded that the judicial use of life without parole and capital punishment at the state level does not support the claim that the expansion of life without parole caused a decline in capital punishment. This is further supported by a study that we referenced earlier by Jewell from USC that again shows there's no positive link between death penalty and life without parole, in that life without parole has decreased the use of the death penalty. In fact, what Jewell showed was that more life without parole sentences were handed out because they were an option, as opposed to sentences of the death penalty that would have been used in its place. Secondly, Wake Forest has talked about giving life without parole to only repeat violent offenders and those with sex crimes. The Bureau of Justice statistics shows that only 2% of violent offenders reoffend. Additionally, on top of that, our plan shows or is instituting a safety review board that does not guarantee release. It guarantees the ability to have yourself viewed to make sure that you are eligible for release. This safety review board will be made up by individuals who are professionals in their field and who can help combat some of the racial biases of the initial sentencing due to their separation from the government entity itself. Thirdly, one of the things that Wake Forest has brought up numerous times is that they believe an appropriate alternative is the ability to use commutation and parole. Thank you. Unfortunately, in states like Maine, neither of those things exist. And on top of that, according to prisonpolicy.org, 16 other states do not have parole. So therefore, it would be incredibly hard to allow these people the opportunity to go through what Wake Forest is talking about through the exoneration process when it doesn't exist in certain states. Overall, though, I'd really like to thank Wake Forest for agreeing that life without parole is incredibly detrimental to the moral welfare of human beings. Again, the one part that we disagree on is that we feel with a 20-year cap that institutes a time period where people are reviewed based upon their merits is far more beneficial than locking people up simply because of misleading statistics. Thank you.
Presenting the negative team's second rebuttal for 3 to 5 minutes, Wake's Marge Strong.
Hey y'all, I'm Marge Strong, and as an abolitionist, I'm extremely excited and honored to be in this debate with you all. This is an awesome program, and I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't see the timer going, so I'm not sure if my speech has started, but it's in. Okay, never mind, it has started. We agree with our opponents that reducing the amount of people and time spent incarcerated is best. However, the question is, how do we best do that? We believe we have a preferable strategy of reforming the instances of life without parole and the prison system itself to a Nordic model. This will prevent the public backlash that increases the use of the death penalty. The death penalty becomes irreversible upon the state-sanctioned murder of the incarcerated person. Life without parole, however, is reversible as the incarcerated individual has more time to prove their innocence. The death penalty is worse than life without parole in every single way that the affirmative has outlined. It is more immoral, it is more costly, it is more damaging to the US image, and it is more racist than life without parole. Most of the affirmative criticisms of life without parole are rooted in the conditions of American prisons, which transforming to a Nordic model and limiting life without parole to extreme cases of repeat violent offenders would resolve most of their offense. The affirmative seems largely to be answering the negative as if we are defending the status quo of just keeping people in the current prison system as it is. That is not our strategy in this debate. Rather, we agree that the prison system is harmful and we need to reform it. Furthermore, the affirmative cannot claim to end virtual life sentences as they definitionally are not included in life without parole. They also can't guarantee that the money saved on prison sentences would go to communities in need. This means that they do not solve or resolve their advantages as well as the counter proposal solves them, because we, in our direct outline, say that we are giving money to communities and switching to a Nordic model. Remember, the debate is not life without parole or no life without parole. It's limited life without parole and the Nordic model versus an increase in the death penalty. The affirmative proposal is not the panacea they describe, but a trade-off that increases the use of the death penalty. All right, a few arguments I want to resolve that were said specifically. First, it was stated that life without parole is immoral, cruel, and unusual punishment because it views that there is no redemption in the person who has been incarcerated. We agree, but we think the death penalty is worse because it truly gives no redemption to the prisoner. There is no chance of commutation. There is no chance of parole. There is no chance of overturning your case. There is only a death sentence. They also, our counter proposals limit of extreme cases solves this lack of redemption better because it says that people who avoid recidivism can, it's like, we put our money where our mouth is. Like, we're actually letting people out and showing that they can, do not crime. Sorry, my words got tumbled there. Next, they say the death penalty, that life without parole increases depression and mental health. Our counter proposal resolves this by creating better conditions within the prisons, analogous to the Nordic model, and limiting who is given life without parole. The next argument my opponents made is that it is not likely to overturn sentences. However, our counter proposal makes it more likely for overturns possible by one, only giving life without parole to rare cases, and two, by switching to the Nordic model, creating a system where overturning cases is a lot more probable. Next, they say that incarcerated people, once they are released, are generally safe and there's a low chance of recidivism. That just shows how few people our counter proposal would put in life without parole. They said that only 2% of people are repeat offenders. Then you would have to repeat a third time to be considered for life without parole, which shows that we are not the mass incarceration that the status quo is. Finally, they say that there's no chance of commutation or parole in many states, but I would like to say that our counter proposal resolves that by making it legal. There's one argument that I skipped that I would like to go back to. The affirmative cited a 2020 Northwestern piece that said that life without parole is not tied to the death penalty. I would like to point out that that is not the reverse causal claim, that ending life without parole would stoke public fear and cause the public to support the death penalty more. Yes.
That's time. Excuse me, Marge, that's time.
Oh, I was just going to say yes. Thank you. All right. Have a great day.
Now, both teams will present closing remarks for 90 seconds, beginning with the affirmative team from Maine's Sean Libby.
Thank you. As my teammates have stressed multiple times in this debate, I also want to stress that our plan absolutely does not call for universal release of all incarcerated individuals in the United States. Our plan calls for universal eligibility for all incarcerated individuals to merely be reviewed by subject matter experts on a safety review board to see if they are indeed fit to rejoin society. Our opponents actually stated that abolition of the life without parole sentences is the goal, meaning they fundamentally agree with us. They also agree that prisons harm people, but they still want people locked up for life. Our team firmly believes that United States of America is the greatest country in the world and a leader in this world. And part of being a leader is understanding that you don't have all the answers and can indeed learn from others. Places like Norway, who our opponents are big fans of, and other European countries have taken a 180-degree turn in the American way of criminal justice in prisons, and they have seen a precipitous drops in crime rates and recidivism rates. Our plan takes pieces from these systems and works them into existing US systems, and we feel we would indeed see the same positive outcomes these other places have seen. We feel very confident that the data shows life without parole sentences and virtual life sentences are fundamentally bad for US society because they tear families apart, ruin lives, come at an exorbitant cost to taxpayers, represent cruel and unusual punishment, they do nothing to deter crime, and are horribly racist. Perhaps the most important aspect of our plan is that our plan provides hope to all incarcerated individuals in America that they too can show and prove they are better than their worst decisions and worthy of another chance. Of all people, we can attest to the fact that for people living behind walls like these, hope is a hell of a thing. For all these reasons, we hope you vote for the affirmative in our plan to abolish life without parole and virtual life sentences in the United States. Thank you.
We will now hear the negative team's closing remarks from Wake's Cole Wolf.
Good afternoon. I'd like to begin my speech by saying that parole is on the ballot for Maine this year. Both sides agree. There is no question that parole should be an option for the vast majority of instances. This debate is a question about whether there should be any instances where it ought to be kept, and if there is any negative consequences to doing the affirmative plan. We think that's the increase of the death penalty. The only citation that they've provided is a Northwestern study that did not make the reverse causal claim, as my previous speaker, Marge, stated, that LWOP would decrease the amount of incarcerated individuals, but then would increase the amount of public backlash because of that. This is inherently irrational, but however, because the death penalty is fundamentally worse because it prevents any instance of rehabilitation or any instance of the possibility of a commuted sentence. This is why we would like to urge everyone in the audience today to support those in Maine fighting for parole, because it allows for the instances that both sides agree on, that rehabilitation is possible and something that should be engaged in. Not only that, but we would also like to urge the argument that the death penalty is fundamentally worse. If my opponents are right that only 1% of people or 2% recidivists with murder then if this is the case, only that percentage of people would allow their sentences through things like LWOP. This is why you should vote in negation, because it's a question of strategies towards abolition. We think that we have provided the best strategy that decreases the potential harms of things like potential backlash, while only allowing those who have engaged in serial murder as well as in serial sexual abuse opportunity towards LWOP. Thank you.
I'd like to thank both our teams for their hard work and willingness to collaborate in personifying the power of thoughtful communication. No matter what the judges decide, I think we can all agree that there are no losers here today. While the debate portion of this contest ends, I hope that more enlightened discussion about our collaborative humanity are just beginning. To lead us in this direction, while the judges do the math on the incredible contest, I'd like to call upon the Executive Director of the National Prison Debate League, my brother, Daniel True.
Thank you, Clarence, and thank both of our teams for an amazing display of what intelligent discourse actually looks and sounds like. This was an incredibly complex legal, social policy issue that you just heard analyzed from a lot of different viewpoints that weren't necessarily held by our debaters, as you heard and as we disclaimed in the beginning. But I think that they both did an amazing job of articulating the challenges with how do we evaluate humanity? How do we value properly human life while honoring what we need to keep everyone safe and to have a sense of what's right and what's just and what's moral in this country. And I think that is a reflection of all of us wanting to have common needs met. And in doing so, there are a lot of considerations that you heard many of them just brilliantly articulated. And so while we have the time, while the judges tabulate the scores, as Clarence said, we want to take a moment to hear from our participants. The debate is over. The conversations are just now beginning. And we hope that we can catalyze more, because not only is parole on the ballot here in Maine, but there are so many people around the country that are affected by this issue, not just individuals on the inside of those walls, but all of the friends, families, and loved ones on the other side who are trying to maintain some sort of connection with their loved ones. And so this is a very large social policy issue in this country as well, not just legal. So I'd like to begin by allowing our participants from Maine. I'd like to start with their team captain, Mr. Sean Libby, if he wouldn't mind taking the microphone again and sharing a little bit about his experience with this process. Sean?
Thank you, Daniel. I first want to start by thanking Daniel, John, and Tom, our coaches. We've been thinking about you, Tom. Just wanted you to know that. I want to thank the Department of Corrections. We have many people from our administration here at the prison watching today. We want to thank the administration in Augusta, the commissioner, the deputy commissioner, everybody up there for entering into this partnership with NPDL and giving us this incredible opportunity. I'm kind of captain in name alone. I think these guys are, I asked them to do this. They stepped up, and if we win, I look good as a captain, but they did all the heavy lifting. And I just want to thank every one of them for taking on this. Oh. Just want to thank all my teammates for just taking on this test and this role of stepping in. A lot of them haven't done this stuff before, and stepping into this role in this kind of venue and really just bringing it, I think. And I just appreciate all the work they've put in. And just I want to thank my mom just for being my mom. She's here today. We want to thank the judges, and really we want to thank Wake Forest, their coach, and all the teammates and team members. I feel like you guys, no offense to some of the other Wake Forest team members, but you guys put on a piece of paper names like Nico Battle and Marge Strong. It's a little intimidating. So But we really do. We appreciate the opportunity. You're all the champions, the reigning champs, and just to be able to do this with you, and it's just an honor. It really is. I hope you understand that. I hope you. Oh, Kruger, nice. Sorry, Nate. My bad. But yeah, we want to thank you for participating in this with us. It's been phenomenal, and I just want to thank everybody. I don't know if anybody else wants to get up and say something, but I'm so appreciative. Anybody?
Hey, Sean,
Yo,
before you bolt from the lectern as you were about to do,
I'm just mumbling, man.
I mean, it's like open mic night at the Apollo with you. So while we have you in such rare form, I just wanted to ask a question because we do want to hear from your teammates. We want to hear from Wake, but obviously on a personal level, if you don't mind sharing, you've
Sure.
been incarcerated for 24 years. This debate was not academic to you.
25.
25, I apologize. And unfortunately, that's a correction that we have to make. But honestly, like, this is not academic to you. What would parole in Maine mean to you and your family? Your mom's in attendance. I mean, can you give voice to that, sir?
I mean, I said it in for me personally, and I said it in our closing, and my teammates said it a lot. It's hope. It's hope for a new life. It's hope for a new start. It's hope for, our family, our friends, our loved ones, that, we have the ability to be reunited. Yeah, I've been here since I was 18 years old. I just started my 26th year, and just having the thought that it's a possibility that they're actually going to be debating it in our state legislature. It's hard not to have hope, but it would mean the world to not just myself, but my teammates and so many other people throughout our state that are locked up and have been. I'm not the only one. I'm one of many. Some might say that me and my teammates here are kind of the exception to the rule of what you would think of people in prison, but I would argue, from what I've seen throughout this prison and throughout this Department of Corrections, that we're more the rule than the exception. And there are far more people throughout the state that are incarcerated in the Maine Department of Corrections who do so many positive things and are far better than the worst decisions they've ever made. And having parole in this state would give everybody a chance and everybody hope that they can be seen as something more than their worst decisions.
Thank you, Sean. And I'm going to alternate before one of your other teammates joins, and that's, you're all welcome to take the podium here, but I'd like to alternate. First of all, does Wake Forest have any rebuttal for that? No? No, but would someone from Wake, all jokes aside, like to address this experience? Because obviously what the NPDL is trying to accomplish here, a large part of it happened well before the debate. When you all agreed to actually join in this programming and transcend the social barriers that divide our humanities, you all made a very profound leap forward in, I believe, what I like to term social diplomacy, because this is a beautiful sociological merging of worlds that don't normally get to collide. And not only did that happen, but you were able to have a powerful exchange of ideas that you didn't necessarily believe in, as many of you stated. It was more academic for you. So I'd just love to hear from the Wake experience. If someone from your team would like to address that, please.
If it's okay, I'll go.
Please,
Like,
please.
did you want to go, Coach Green? All right. I just want to say that honestly, the hardest part of this debate was taking on the negative side. The hardest thing that the Wake Forest debate team struggled with was getting people who were willing to even academically say, no, I want life without parole. We are a very left-minded debate team. And so it was difficult to come up with it. Even as debating, it was, really hard. And I thank you for challenging us. And I thank you for understanding that we did this debate solely so that you could take that position, not because this is a position that we believe. And I really hope that the ballot reform in Maine passes and y'all get a chance at parole like that. If anyone needs a pen pal, I'm around.
Thank you, Marge, and really appreciate the perspective because I understand that that's very valid. Sometimes in a debate, you do have to play devil's advocate and it becomes an academic exercise. And obviously you accommodated, your teammates accommodated our formatting with the 5-person teams, which is unique to NPDL, as well as the position that you didn't necessarily support. So just want to make that clear to our viewers at home who don't understand maybe some of those dynamics that were at play here, so that everyone's clear on what they did just see and hear. Let's thank you very much, Marge. Additionally, I already thanked our partners at Maine DOC and they've been acknowledged, but I would like to acknowledge the leadership of Maine DOC because let's be honest, prisons are not known for opening doors, and they have opened some very important programmatic doors to allow for this sort of programming and these sort of events and this sociological merging to actually take place. And that requires a lot of paradigm changing decisions from DOC leaders who are very risk averse traditionally. The NPDL, where we're in discussions to work in many other states and have many, serious security concerns. And it's very important to acknowledge the leadership that allows for those fears to be overridden, because we can't live in fear. We have to be able to know what's possible if we're ever going to move forward and move the needle on these issues. And as you see, education is something that Maine DOC supports. Many of our students and participants are able to participate in even graduate programs. They don't get funded. They have to, they have to seek funding, and that's always something we could need support with. But it allows for that to take place uniquely in Maine, and we appreciate the relationship and partnership because it is very much the only thing that allows for us to build this kind of program out. So thank you to Maine DOC. And with that, I'd like to go back to the Maine team and hear more from them. So would someone from Maine like to take the lectern again?
How's everybody doing? I just want to first start by saying, Daniel, thank you very much for putting this event together. Thank you and your team. This has been an extraordinary experience to be able to have this experience. And Wake Forest, thank you for stepping up to the plate. I can't imagine that, being left-brained and left-minded and having this topic, it was an easy topic to address and to face, where your heart is somewhere, and to argue against where your heart and your consciousness is, that's going to be difficult. And at the same time, I want to acknowledge everybody that got on today to watch this. Thank you very much for taking your time to be here. And then thank you to the Maine Department of Corrections. I don't think a lot of people in society really understand the work that's being done here in Maine. Maine, our administration, they are really pioneers in what can be done in corrections. Maine is stepping out and doing things that no other states are doing, and they're actually leading the way. They're showing other states what is possible, and because of that, doors are opening. I just learned 2 days ago, Pennsylvania just opened up an ELU unit, and San Quentin just opened up an earned living unit, which is huge. It's that Norway model that you're talking about, and that's because of the work of Maine. If somebody here in the United States wasn't a pioneer and they weren't stepping up and doing this groundbreaking work, no other place would do that. Leo and I are about to start our PhD degrees from prison. As far as I know, ChatGPT, you asked that, Leo and I will be the first people in the United States of America to start a PhD from a prison setting, which is freaking pretty awesome. And that's because, again, of our administration. I got to say this, maybe it's a touch of Stockholm syndrome, and that's fine if it is. But the truth and the reality, I have a lot of love and appreciation for our warden, for our commissioner, for our deputy wardens, for our programs coordinator, for our unit managers here, for our educational department. And that's because of the opportunities that they're providing us. It's crazy to think, and since starting this debate, I've met 4 people that had life without the possibility of parole. Clarence, you're one of them that actually overturned your cases. And it's crazy. We live in a nation where we're passing out sentences to 16, 17-year-old, 18-year-olds where they have no hope of ever getting out of prison again. And even if it's a life sentence that somebody receives and they go into a prison system, can you imagine walking into a prison system with all the different ideas and ideologies that we have what prison is because of the movies and these things that we're told? So these people come in and they commit these new crimes to fit in, and then it just feeds the system even further. So we're not doing any justice by sentencing these kids to these long sentences like that. In fact, I really truthfully believe if we can, if the United States can follow the work that Maine is doing, we are going to come up with a new collective consciousness and a new collective system that's about healing and not about punishment. The only thing that we're missing, as you all know here on this call, is we are missing parole in Maine. That's the one thing that could dovetail into this work that we've done here that would be a perfect match and a perfect fit. And then the last thing I just want to say is just thank you. I mean, this was a really great opportunity. I got really emotional, in case anybody didn't tell, when I was doing this, and I got emotional. My mom came up on Sunday. She was going to be here today. She went in for surgery, and my victim's mom came up with her for a visit. And they were both talking to me. It was like, if you were out, you could help us. And my victim's mom was saying that she's like, if you got out, your mom's had 3 shoulder surgeries now. You could be out there helping your mom, and you could be out there helping me. And it's like, you know, the thought hit me is like, yeah, I would be so far better off if I did have an opportunity to be out of this place and I could contribute and give back. And that was the thought that that occurred to me as I was actually reading my debate. It was like, not just myself, but the guys on the team here, they could do so much good if they, with this lived experience of incarceration and healing, they could do so much good on the outside. And several of our friends that have been through this system, that have been educated, are out there doing this work right now. And I think many of us want to just follow suit with that. So I just want to end by saying thank you very much. Much love to all of you. Clarence, I would strongly suggest that you do a sound check next time before we do this. And with that being said, many blessings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And any technical difficulties, I take full responsibility for, and certainly no fault on anyone's part. But speaking of Clarence, I think it's appropriate that we hear from him next. He does have lived experience on this issue that is very unique to this topic. So I'd like to introduce Clarence to say a few words.
For the record, when you have a Barry White tone, you tend to have problems when you're speaking. Listen, I know where you brothers stand. I also know where Wake Forest stands as well, because we have had the debate. Me and Dan, we've gone back centuries, it feels like, but we also had to debate things that we fully didn't believe in. So I just want to speak to real quick about hope. Serving a natural life sentence, I lost hope, because for a while I didn't believe that I would ever see my children grow. I would ever see my family or my friends, those intimate moments that you have with them. So I kind of lost hope, and thanks to Dan and some special volunteers, they kind of kept me sane. Life without parole, let's call it what it is. It's just another form of death. It's a slow death. And most people don't realize how much it really costs. But I say to you, gentlemen, keep doing what you're doing. Keep building that strength mentally, physically, because as I've seen the world changed. Like I said, the first 10 years was a rough ride, Dan, to tell you. It was a real rough ride, but I kept the faith in the generations that are coming along. They actually see the world different. Stay positive. Like I said, I sat there serving a natural life sentence where I did not believe I would be home.
He's waiting on who?
So with that, keep the hope, keep the strength, keep your mind sharp, because when you do come home, all the planning that you're doing there is going to be completely different out here. But it's a blessing on this side. Wake Forest, I appreciate you, because I don't think you realize the magnitude of what you're doing. You're helping those who may not feel part of society, an accepted part of society. And that builds strength there. Trust me, there's volunteers who know how much and how important this truly is. Dan knows, if it wasn't for Dan getting me into the debate space, teaching me how to do Toastmasters, how to publicly speak, he helped me find my voice. Gentlemen, I wish you the best in life, in prosperity. I am so proud of all your accomplishments. Listen, hope keeps you strong. And with that, I don't want to take up too much time, but any questions, I'm more than willing to answer. So I'm going to turn it over to some other people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clarence. Obviously, this is, again, not academic to you. And when we were in the trenches together, I know that we found hope by keeping our minds sharp. And while our physical bodies were in prison, we made sure that we decarcerated our minds and as many minds of our peers as possible through this programming. And the NPDL continues to create these opportunities and pay it forward in a way that we're both, our whole team is super proud to be able to do, so that we can not only decarcerate minds in this country, but also amplify the voices of those who aren't included on major policy issues that affect disadvantaged communities the most. And it is really difficult when you carry the weight of those bad policies and they're made about us without us. And I think that's one of the main things that we like to see empowered in people, to be able to not just discover their voices, as you're hearing from our participants from Maine, but also then to hone those voices so that people can become better self-advocates, leaders, and advocates for others. And in doing so, we're able then to really, advance these issues, because those that are most impacted by them have the greatest motivation to help affect change. And I think that you heard a lot of that powerful inspirational value today. With that, I'd like to hear from our judges are almost done tabulating the scores. I want to hear from a few more participants. I want to hear from someone from the judge's perspective. We have all of our panelists are extremely experienced and talented in the field. I'd like to introduce our Assistant Attorney General from the District of Columbia, Priscilla Guerrero, to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you all for having me and for inviting me to be a panelist on today's debate. I have the honor of saying that I worked with both Clarence and Daniel in the inside community over 10 years ago, where I participated in a debate with both Daniel and Clarence, where we debated the topic of do the lack of partisan commutations send the message that people are not redeemable? So it's nice to feel like this is now full circle, where we are now working together in the outside community on another debate. You all did an incredible job today. I very much appreciate this topic, very much was taking notes. I'm a messy note taker, but I was taking notes nonetheless. I am a prosecutor. That is the work that I do. And I can tell you all with certainty that your humanity and your ability to be rehabilitated is always at the forefront of the work that I do. I currently work in the juvenile unit because of that, because I'd like to focus on a balance between punishment and rehabilitation. So this has definitely been an informative debate. I very much appreciate all of the information, all the citations that I can go back and research. And I just appreciate being a part of this opportunity. And thank you for allowing me and for allowing me to be part of the panel today to judge today's debate. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. It is really cool to see how this has evolved full circle and how surreal it is to be working together on this side. Priscilla was a criminal justice major. When we started this program, we didn't have access to higher education in prison. And we got to work together with her school and started the first Inside Out prison education program in our facility at Old Colony Correctional Center back in the earlier 2000s. So thank you very much for again supporting this work and being such a great ambassador with that surreal perspective. I mean, how surreal is it that we're all sharing the same space from all these different worldviews, and again having this beautiful merging in which we can, even if we disagree with some of the policy discussions, we don't have to be disagreeable in doing so, and we can all learn from each other. We can increase our empathy, and we can see where other people are coming from, and we're not so different. The things that motivate us, the things that inform us, they all come from the inputs that we receive. And just because they're different doesn't mean that they're wrong. So I think it's really cool to have this kind of space to have these intelligent discussions. And speaking of intelligent discussions, I'd like to hear from our national debate unprecedented Triple Crown winners of all three of the major national debate tournaments this year. I'd like to hear from the coach's perspective, if Justin Green from Wake Forest would mind telling us a little bit about this experience from his point of view. Justin?
Justin, you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
No.
Oh, yeah, we're good.
We're good. Okay. Want to offer a couple of thank yous and congratulations. Certainly the NPDL staff, Daniel and Clarence. Just hearing the words is amazing for our students, and understanding an opportunity to interact with others is certainly phenomenal. Thank you to our judges. I know it's time out of the day. Many of you all have schedules and really appreciate the opportunity, but I kind of want to spend the most of our time here, at least in our brief thank yous, to thanking the MSP debate team. Our students have some of the best professors in the country, but to have this opportunity to learn and the thankfulness which we approach this, for you all sharing your side, your pictures, your stories, your moments. It's not an easy task. We know that you all have been preparing long and hard. And quite frankly, it was probably our toughest debate of the championship season was against you all. Certainly, the way in which you all approached it, it was one where our debaters really had to think hard about how we're going to try to do justice to this topic. But we know that you all brought the heat. And we're quite frankly, a little bit harder than the debate that we had against Michigan in one of the championships. So, well done, and certainly appreciate the great work. And if we're looking at this purely from a teaching perspective, I think you all have offered something to our students they would not be able to get in any other circumstance or format. And so thank you for participating and putting all the energy forward. It will make all the difference to them in the world. I'll pass it off from there and not belay the point any further.
Thank you very much, Coach Green. And also want to acknowledge our Assistant Director, Brittany Lamar, who's handled all the coordination you're not seeing right now. There's so many people that make these events possible. And now that we have reached the end and our judges are ready to announce the winner, I know that's what you're all waiting for at this point, so I will not belabor that news. Could we please have Chief Judge Ed Lee take the lectern and announce today's debate contest winner? Ed?
Yes, I will quickly say that these debates are a testament that brilliance and excellence resides in every corridor of our society. And this was an exceedingly close debate, with there being a tie and one of the ballots having a differential of 0.5 points. But Maine received the majority of the ballots. Congratulations to Maine for being victorious.
Thank you, Judge Lee, and amazing. So we just beat the defending triple national champions in a much contested debate on a very important topic, a testament to the not only the human capacity, but intellectual talent and the redemptive ability of our participants to show their humanity and their knowledge. But thank you so much for everyone's time and contributions to making such a unique event possible. Thank you so much to you, Judge Lee, and the judging panel. Can't wait to get the fall lineup together. That'll be on the npdl.org. Please stay in touch. And if you want to support our work further, please reach out and we can talk about what that looks like. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day. Congratulations to Wake Forest and to Maine State for all of their hard work and amazing performance. Congratulations.
Can I say one thing real quick?
Absolutely.
That we have a shared friend, some of us, who told us a story a while ago that he felt he was improperly kicked out of the Wake Forest computer lab and or library years ago. So we just want to say to John, you have been avenged.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, this one's for John.
Enjoy the win, fellas.
Thank you, everybody.
We'll
Bye,
see
everyone. Thank you so much.
you all in the debriefs tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day. Great way to end the NPDL spring season. Have a great one.
Bye, you too. Thank you.